morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Industry Podcast, an esports insider podcast focused on the people and personalities in and around the esports industry. I'm your host, Kerry, and today I'm joined by Tim Mcguinness, the co-founder and CEO of Virtex. How are we doing today, Tim?
Hi, Kerry. Thank you very much for having me on. Lovely to be here. And doing okay. Good start to the week. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to also talking a little bit more about what we're doing. But good stuff.
Nice. So, let's just start off. What are you doing, Tim? I've just learned about Virtex today, so I'm really excited. Really excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, maybe I can give a little bit of context. I guess. I can give the short answer. Basically, maybe that's a good place to start. We're building a virtual esports stadium experience. I think is the short and sweet of it. Maybe I can give a little bit of background about myself and get to why we've got here. But basically, coming from esports and working in the game dev and VR industry for best part of almost 10 years now, we really kind of wanted to create something that kind of brings that real world experience you get going to a physical stadium, like with friends, with the crowd, with the atmosphere, so that you can have that experience wherever you are, wherever in the world, basically. It's obviously grown a lot more since then, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But that's sort of the gist of it, I think.
And what really inspired you to create this sort of virtual stadium experience with your background in the game dev sector?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe it can. I'll try to keep the long story not too long. Try and keep it somewhat short. But yeah, so I mean, for me specifically, so my background actually is, as I mentioned, in VR as well. Worked a little bit in esports myself too. Worked as a commentator. Worked for DSL. Worked on a couple of shows. Did IEM on stage, which was awesome. So got to experience a couple of different parts of the ecosystem, which is so a lot of respect for everyone across the board, wherever they work, whether that's in production, teams, everything. So I mean, my background basically started in VR. So I was actually way back when, in I think it was 2012. I was a Kickstarter backer for the very first VR Kickstarter campaign, and that was with Oculus before they got bought by Facebook, and then everything else happened around that. But before the metaverse was called the metaverse, God, that's the first and last time I want to say that word on this podcast. But I've got to at least mention it once. So long story short, started kind of in the VR space, been pretty much working with the technology since day one. Tried it, loved it. Also, that said, massive is esports fan. Also, like been playing League since like season 2, basically. Always watch League and the League esports scene and just the esports scene in general, growing up over the years. And never good enough for myself to compete, but I was like a massive fan from the sidelines. Used to go to LANs all the time, lots of big events, etc. And then obviously, kind of as time progressed, VR started coming around. So the 2018 period. Few people may remember ESL actually partnered with Oculus to do the first VR esports league, which is called the VR League. Small kind of VR league in the grand scheme of things. They basically ran over the course of a few years. Back in kind of 2017, I think started at ESL 1, I believe, back in 2017 in Hamburg. I actually started competing as a player. So weirdly enough, I was like, well, hey, I was big into esports. Also very much been working with VR since pretty much day one. So I knew my stuff there. And for me, it was always a bit of a combination of kind of the two things together. So I actually started competing as a player in that. Did that for a little while. Got involved then setting up my own team in the space, as you do in the grassroots esports thing. You start playing, and it's like, oh well, I can do more with this. So I did that for a while. After 2 seasons, I retired actually from playing because there's starting to become enough competition in terms of people that were competing in the games, whereby training, as most people will know, was becoming a full-time job really quickly, and lots of hours going in to maintain competing at that level. So I actually stepped back. Then, very fortunately, got offered to work with ESL as part of the broadcast. So got to spend some time in the studios in Poland. Worked on I Am Katowice, as I mentioned, a couple of shows with a few awesome people I was still keeping contact with. Jason Kaplan, Blue. Watched a couple really awesome shows with all those guys. So yeah, got to kind of experience the production side of things. And it was kind of doing this journey basically a little bit, both competing and then also being involved in building games and experiences. Understanding what was technically feasible, like being able to build these experiences, build these games, etc., with the tools that are available and what was becoming available basically in the space. But then also going to these events and being a massive esports fan, knowing like how willing I was to fly halfway around the world to like attend these things, and like how much I valued and the community values the experience of the crowd, the atmosphere, like everything that makes these events so special. So that's kind of where the idea for Vertex really started, was the kind of understanding of what was technically possible, knowing that nothing like this existed to date, and also then kind of knowing the demand really from the community of being like, well, like especially obviously COVID happened between then and now, so that's obviously a whole other different ball game when it comes down to running events, etc. That said, incredibly happy to see filled out stadiums. I was literally watching the major the day, the last premiere, and it was incredible to see the fully packed stadium. So awesome to see like real events coming back like in full swing, but still like the traveling, everything else that goes around it. There's lots of reasons why you can't necessarily get there. So the idea for us always was to try and bring some of that experience to you at home. Obviously, Twitch is its own thing in and of itself, but trying to really kind of get that immersive crowd, the social experience, the being able to hang out with friends, because there are obviously so many issues with solutions that exist today. And I mean, they fill a purpose, like watching the League of Legends Worlds on Discord with your friends can be fun, but put 200 people in a Discord call and see how quickly you can stop being able to hear everyone else from speaking. So lots of like these things were kind of playing into it, and we really wanted to try and build something that kind of delivered on that, really.
Yeah, cool, interesting. So you've had the experience of being on a stage and hosting and getting that point of view of being on stage and seeing the crowd. And I assume that you've also attended quite a few events as well, and like seen down and watched the action there. So what aspect really inspired you to create a VR arena then? Mostly, was it also like considering the production aspect of how can we produce a really great event in VR that is maybe easier or more complex or just more simple and easy to understand in
Yeah.
terms of building something digitally? Or was it just thinking about the audience experience on how can this be in a way like virtually scalable across and not have to bring in all these resources, get people to travel, book hotels, and all these expenses, and basically carbon output as well to
Yeah,
put on
sure.
these events?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, one thing I will point out as well is, and I guess this is something that I kind of is a little bit misleading as well, because when I talk about my background and kind of where I've come from, I mention VR a lot, so I completely understand. Like, but I always want to take the opportunity to mention that VR is, for the way we look at it and kind of the way it's evolved nowadays, realistically, is a means to interacting with a virtual space. Really, it's kind of a medium in which you'd interact with something. That said, and as with us, as with many other apps that are out there today, everything from like Rec Room, Roblox, like every other, all the big social VR or XR platforms you would have seen. We're also not just VR. Where VR is like one of the ways of interacting, definitely going to be the most immersive. And we have a lot of, obviously, with background, a lot of design experience in VR. So we try and really build a really good, compelling VR experience. But we care just as much about people experiencing this on like everything from like 2D on desktop, on console, etc. So we're in the similar way trying to make sure it's a virtual experience that's accessible for everyone. And I think that's, to be honest, the way forward. It's kind of more this virtual counterpart. And I think you mentioned it briefly towards the end there, and I think it's very much for us. It was a driver knowing lots of the limitations that exist within doing a physical real world event, right? And not just the limitations around it, but and like these limitations are also some of the selling points as well. Like they're the reasons you go. It's like, but there's also, we knew like how much of a subset of the community really wanted more. They wanted to be like closer to the action. They wanted to be like more involved, like actively engaged within stuff. Like watching an opening ceremony for any major worlds, etc. It's all incredible, but there's just this degree of separation, right? It's never going to be close to the real thing. And for us, we always wanted to try and bring it that one step closer. So the way we kind of look at it for us, and I think this is also true for other virtual experiences. I mean, you just have to look at what other games are doing. Fortnite is the prime example, right? Everyone looks at the Travis Scott Fortnite concert as like one of the biggest, like awesome, most awesome kind of steps into this kind of virtual style live event experience. Although that was obviously in the case of music, but I think for us, it was always to try and build this middle ground, really. Whereas on the one side, you have this awesome in-person event that will never be able to be replaced, right? That's not also our purpose. We're not here to we don't want to try and replace either of these things, because like whether that's the real world experience or the experience you get watching it on Twitch, like on your other browser while you're playing your game or chatting with your friends or whatever, right? Like these two things do what they do exceptionally well. We wanted to kind of create something that exists in the middle, which sort of bridges that gap a little bit, because for us, I think that was where we felt that there is a lot that can be done, and especially when you start talking about what can then be accomplished in games and in game engines, I think that's where creatively we can start really flexing and doing some very cool stuff. I mean, I mentioned the Travis Scott Fortnite concert as a good example of when you have the tools available creatively, you can do some really incredible things that like you couldn't even do in the real world, right? So this is also where we can start to explore. But yeah, there's that's sort of I think where we started and sort of what are, let's say, where we see ourselves in the spectrum. But definitely, I think for us, it's kind of creating the virtual counterpart to a real experience, whether that is it's actually a real LAN event or maybe there isn't a physical LAN presence, right? Like you have online tournaments and there's like apart from watching it like on Twitch or on YouTube, there's no way to get close to the action because there's no physical event you can go to. So I think as well in those scenarios, it's where we wanted to create that space as well.
Yeah, I always thought like a very interesting aspect of like watching video games, and like let's say for instance you're in a battle royale or you're in a competitive game and then you die and then you sort of take on an observer role, right? And you can live through the action. You're no longer in there, but you can still follow the action around and check out things and whatever. But like I haven't really seen that really utilized in a fan experience, right? As you're watching it, really, if you're watching esports on Twitch, you're being basically you're on a linear journey through what the observers are doing and then what the broadcaster are deciding where the action is. And what I read on your website that is something that Virtex is trying to explore as well through VR, is really to be able to place the viewer right there in the middle of the action. And that is a completely different experience than if you're at a stadium event, you're still watching a screen, right? And still you're on
I
that rails journey.
on that topic, actually, like is really topical. I literally watched, I think, Ludwig's video this afternoon about how Riot stole 50 grand from him because he booked a booth at League Worlds and was like front row seats, which was amazing for the opening ceremony. But as soon as the game started, he was watching it at a 180-degree view with his neck basically like this, and they ended up going back to the lounge that they had at the venue. I think like you're absolutely right. Like even when you go to a physical LAN, like you're still watching a screen, right? You see the players, and it's incredible. And as I said, this is we're not trying to say like LAN is bad or anything. Like LAN is irreplaceable, right? Like the experience is like it's completely unique, especially for esports as well. I would say it's like it's such a awesome feeling to be around the community of people that you know care and love about the same thing as you, and it's just whole thing is incredible. So
Yeah, I've always said that like the LAN is what sells people on esports. If you don't get it
100%.
yet or whatever, or you're
Yeah,
trying to sell
100%.
someone esports, you take them to a LAN and then they're sold.
I've even seen people that don't even understand the game that's being played at the LAN, but it's everything around it that makes it. I mean, it's a quote that we talk about a lot internally, but Maradona, I think, said that going to a football match starts when you leave your home and it ends when you get home, right? It's the entire experience from the whole thing. So I think we also look at it like that as well. But yeah, so I think coming back to your question, though, with regards to the kind of watching the viewing experience, right, and like the spectating of it. So I think I guess this is also one thing to be like kind of explained. So when we say we want to build the virtual esports stadium, we also mean not watching a screen. Like that's actually one of the differences when we say build the virtual esports stadium. Unlike a real world esports stadium experience, what we also do is we also try and make it so that you can watch the game like you watch a real world sport in a real world stadium instead. So this is where, like, this is what that's very unique. Hasn't been done before from this kind of spectating perspective. We're working with some really cool partners in the space, lots of different games as well. And I think the idea for us is that it's a very different approach to watching games. Actually, it's very unique. And the idea, as I said, is more so that the ability to watch a game like you watch a real world sport. Like I think again, coming back to this video, Lugwood did like literally like I think it came out today. He literally said the thing with watching real world sports in a real world stadium is you're like courtside, right? You can see like if the bronze on the pitch, like you're on the court, you can literally see him in front of you, right? And that's what makes it so cool. And I think with what we're building as well, although obviously physically you can't unfortunately bring like the entire all these games into the real world just yet. But virtually speaking, you can literally be courtside and like see the players like right in front of you again. And we build everything we do is like pretty much all cases has a 3D counterpart. So you're watching this stuff happening live in 3D in real time, whatever platform you're on. That includes VR, but also 2D as well. So we really try and do that, and that's definitely a new way of watching. So I think it's going to be something that we're really interested to see how people like engage and interact with this, because we've heard like obviously like we believe in this ourselves because that's why we're building the thing, but we're really excited, I think, to see how people perceive this way of watching games, because for us and how we've also worked with our partners and different game developers, like there is a very clear differentiator here where the feeling is far closer to this LAN experience where you have the social context and everything else around it, but it also kind of really bridges that gap between like real world sports and esports, where like you're kind of just seeing it happening in front of you like in real time. And then obviously once you have that in 3D, the cool thing we can do that you can't do in real world sports is you can step onto the pitch like as the game's happening. Like that's the other really cool thing I think we also try and do, because I know you said like when you die in a game you can go into like a spectator mode. Well, the way that we work with games and the 3D component of this is that there's a full degree of separation between our experience in the original game engine, and that means that we have full control over optimizing it from a viewing experience perspective. I think you mentioned battle royales is a really good example, whereby if you're watching a broadcast, let's say Fortnite, you've got multiple teams competing, or Apex Legends is another good example. Maybe let's say you're a Team Liquid fan, or like whichever a fan of a certain team, right? And you really want to follow your team. The broadcast physically cannot stick on Team Liquid the entire time the competition's going on. They have to jump around the map. It's just physically impossible. However, from our side, because we have a full 3D recreation that's going on live in real time, you could have 500, several thousand people in the stadium watching different perspectives within the game at the same time in the same space. So they're still seeing this entire shared experience. They can also see a unified, synchronized experience, so they want to have that. But like, let's say they want to jump in the map and follow their favorite team, they can do that. I think this is one of the really unique things where we're going to be kind of, and this is also where I said we're really interested to see how people interact and react with this, and we're really excited about that bit, because there is something very special about being able to jump into a game, stand next to a player you've watched for maybe years, and literally stand next to them as they're doing something in the game in real time. Like that's the really cool thing. And be able to have that live real time experience, more akin to what you would have in like a real world sports stadium, but obviously with all the bells and whistles kind of thrown into that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting about that is like, if you get front row seats at a LAN or whatever, and you're just feet away from a legend, really all you're watching them do is focus on a screen and click. You're not really able to see them perform as you would if you're sitting courtside watching LeBron. Like, you really get to see that aspect. Whereas, I'm imagining, let's say, like Valorant, right? And like you could potentially have a stadium built around the map where people can then see what's happening based on their point of view where they are in the stadium, and that's way more interesting than being in a VR stadium and then still looking at a screen to
Yeah.
see the action, right? Like, as you're saying, this is what I'm imagining, at least, that with this
Yeah,
3D
absolutely.
recreation of what's happening, you can basically have that be the field and then have
Yes.
that perspective around there.
Exactly, and what I'll add as well, because obviously, like and we're very excited because people will be able to see what we mean when we say 3D recreation, but we aim for one every single time. So that's like, because that's obviously also really important for us as well, and I guess this kind of comes into a little bit of like how we work as well, because with this experience, we are also obviously rendering the game in 3D. So we actually work with the original publishers for all of the games that we work on as well, to make sure that they're happy with the way that we're representing their game. Because as I said, we are one for one. That's our target for every game we work in. So realistically, like our objective is always, you can't tell the difference. We've actually tricked developers of their own of the games themselves that we've worked on, some cases that they like couldn't tell this wasn't in the original game, which is like fantastic. That's what we aim for. But I think that's sort of where we look at. But yeah, absolutely, it's kind of what you just described, right? The ability to be able to sit like in a stadium have a unique perspective on the game, but also in the social context, right? Like having your friends with you, and then like on top of that, not only being able to jump into the game, following the players and teams that you care about, but your friends being able to do that with you, right, at the same time. And again, this is sort of where we kind of bridge this gap a little bit, and we think that kind of living in this sort of no man's land in between the 2D video experience and the real world experience in games, basically, and in a game engine experience, we can create a really unique kind of viewing experiences and opportunities that physically couldn't be done anywhere else. Because I mean, as well, game developers, if I'm being honest, have their hands full building their games in most cases as well. Spectating and the production and all these additional kind of viewing experience options are really hard for them to find time to resource. So I think it's also where we can help with that significantly and create cool and cooler experiences that wouldn't be achievable otherwise. I think that's the other thing that's also really interesting as well. And again, this kind of comes into how we work with publishers too. But again, as I said, we work directly with them in terms of all aspects of this to make sure that they really are like happy that we're presenting their game in a way that they feel does it justice, really. So yeah.
Yeah, but from also what I understand, that's, we're still in sort of some baby steps processes where I think you guys had just sort of went live last year, right? So you're not yet at the stage where you're building a virtual stadium around Valorant and like these types of games yet, right? And as you said, like you're sort of focused on VR, but VR is not really the end all be all of what you're doing, like purely what you're doing.
Yeah.
So what type of titles are you currently working with, and what, like, I guess, like, could you talk a little bit about your current roadmap, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I can talk a little bit. I can't talk, unfortunately, about all the games we have coming. There will be some announcements, is all I can say, over the coming kind of couple months. We have a few games that are scheduled to be coming onto the platform early next year. But obviously, we announced last year our partnership with Meta. So, bringing Echo VR, which is still one of the most popular competitive VR games that's out there. For people that aren't familiar, it's kind of like a VR equivalent of Rocket League, is what I would kind of call it. It's like zero gravity. Instead of a football, you got a disc and you got to put it in the other team's goal. Kind of the essence of it. So that's the game that we're going to be launching with. We're actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going into closed beta right now. Viewing to go into open beta over the course of the next few months as we scale up our services. But that's sort of where we are right now, and that's going to be the first game on the platform, and actually be the first time anyone's seen anything inside the app, actually, which is also really exciting. By the time this podcast comes out, I'm not sure exactly when it'll be out, but the trailer may have come out by then, so we'll make sure to let you guys know when that's going to come out, but it should be pretty soon. So realistically, we're kind of at a stage now where we're starting to roll out to new titles. I can't say the next game that we've got coming up. What I can say about it, though, is expect to hear something from us very early next year, and it will be one of the top esports titles in the world that will be coming to the platform. So can't say which one, but you can. I'll say a top esports title, and you can take a guess and see which one comes out. But yeah, we have, and then also further to that, we have more games we're looking to bring to the platform. But I think as well is that although I mentioned VR, and obviously VR is one of the areas that we're working with. Echo VR is also a VR game, so you think, oh, they're building this virtual stadium for VR games. It's like, no, it's really, this experience is cross-platform, 2D VR, and other different devices coming in future. And that also means we're also working with non-VR games as well. And as I said, we're working on a top global esports title. We are talking to a lot of different publishers. Again, I can't say too much about any of that, but generally speaking, we're really interested and engaged with most of the top publishers, and we're really excited to try and bring more content to the platform as well over the coming sort of years. That said, we are building a first. So this is the first time this kind of experience has existed. This is the first time, in some cases, like even these licensing conversations have ever existed for games as well. So we are kind of doing a lot of firsts here, and that usually does mean that things take a little bit longer. But that said, we're really excited about what we have coming up. And I think really our focus right now for us specifically is really just delivering some really cool content and really cool experiences going into the first half of next year. So we have obviously some events scheduled and announcements planned. So I basically say if you're really interested to see how this goes, keep an eye out for us in the first half of next year, especially very early on in the year. We'll have some pretty big announcements for the new games.
Awesome. Great news. I'm not going to hazard a guess at the title, but um, I had I like so what as you're telling this little bit about it, I started to think about what type of sort of media rights are involved in this, because in a way you're potentially broadcasting, right? You're broadcasting esports, but it's in a closed environment, right? It's not like out there like Twitch, or maybe you're also somehow able to broadcast this into, like, I don't know, VR's version of Twitch. Maybe that's sort of something that you're making. So I guess, okay, let me rephrase this. Two parts of this question. A, what is sort of the experience of going into Vertex and finding something to
Yep.
I guess interact with, right?
Yep.
So what is that sort of discovery, or how do you search or whatever? How does that look? And then also what is, well, let's start there. Let's start there. Let's not make it too
Okay, yeah,
complicated.
sure. Yeah, so I think I can give it kind of it. Well, it's going to be a little bit boring to some extent the answer because we kind of try and mirror like a little bit of the real world experience basically. So the idea is when you enter into the app, you enter into one of our lobby servers, so a lobby. Kind of think of it if you're familiar with like PlayStation Home back in the day, like those kind of experiences where you enter into the main lobby server. For us, we kind of refer to that space as the outer ring. So if you think about when last time you went to a real world stadium, for us, it's that space that exists outside of the stadium itself but is where you have your lounges, your bars, your storefronts, potentially things like team homes, VIP lounges, etc., which are all things that we have and we're working on building. But for us, we kind of look at it as the outer ring. So it's that sort of, as I said earlier as well, the experience starts on your like as soon as you leave to the event and when you get home. So we also try and encapsulate that a lot with the within the experience. So once you enter into the lobby server, from there you can go to any stadium that we have up and running. So that will mean any event that's running on the platform, anything live from whatever stadium or whatever games that we have running. Every game has its own stadium that we have on the platform as well. So I know you gave the example before of like having a stadium built around a map in Valorant as an example, and I think that's exactly how we do it. Basically, for every game, we have a new stadium, a new unique environment that goes with it because we also understand as well, like it has to kind of fit as well. Different. I'll also say now, one of the cool things that we've been working on, and I guess which is kind of the more interesting things as well for like the virtual experience side of things, because again, we're really focused on live content as well. Like we are very much focused on live streaming, live events, everything around that. But I think as well, it's like how do you watch 3D content, right? Because if I was to like take I don't know any game like whatever it is, like I think you let's say Valorant as an example because you brought that up. If I was to take Valorant and just put that and build a stadium around it, right? I'm basically looking at a mini map the entire time, essentially, right? Because you can't really see what's going on. So, depending on the game and depending on the genre of game, so that's like, for example, a first-person shooter, driving sim, whatever it might be, different games require different, let's say, environments for a conducive 3D viewing experience. You kind of got to think about it in the same way if you were to design a real world stadium, you kind of had to think about what content's going to go in that stadium so you can make sure the design around it, whether that's like for acoustics or like the flow of people, like how many people, like how seating, like all of these various different things. You think about that as well. So we kind of do a similar thing within that space. So it really depends on the different games. But the idea is, as I said, you would enter into the lobby, going back to the kind of user journey. From there, there's a bunch of stuff you can do in that space, mini games, various other things. You can storefront, cosmetics, buying like items, etc. Those kind of things. And then from there, you would travel to whatever stadium or event that you're interested in. The kind of way we look at it is if you think about the lobby as sort of the homepage of Twitch, and then the stadiums as channels, if you kind of think about it like that. So in the same way I go to Twitch and I click on my streamer that I want to watch, you go to the app in the lobby, and then from there you go to the stadium where you want to watch that content in.
And I mean, something that we've also chatted about in this podcast before is about in-game advertising. And so is that a sort of aspect of an offering for you guys, and a bit of monetization of being able to activate partners, and if you're, let's say, let's just make something up. Let's say you're partnering with ESL, and ESL, let's say, a Counter Strike or something. Are you able to then integrate not only the branding for this event within the stadium as well, so that there's not only the live event potentially, but then there's also the Virtex event that you can join in, and then have all of that integration, but then also all of the partners of the broadcast be able to integrate that in, or potentially partners of Virtex to be able to integrate that into the stadiums and the outer ring and all of these aspects? Is that part of the offering as well, or at least like
Yeah.
what you're hoping for?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is kind of, I guess, comes down to like sort of how we operate and how also we operate in the ecosystem, I guess, because this is kind of where it ends up basically. Like how does this work? Because obviously within esports, you have the publishers, you have the organizers, you have the teams, you have the brands, and you have the brands that are supporting either the organizer or the team, and the list goes on and on and on. But yeah, when it comes down to advertising for us, so we like yes, advertising is a thing for us. We typically avoid things like programmatic advertising right now, just because like we think that there is a lot more that can be done in terms of sort of immersive engagement advertising. It's more like I say the way you could kind of phrase it is more akin to what you'd see in a real world venue, right? If you've been to I Am Katowice, like the people walking around with all the Pringles merch, you've got like those kind of things where they are more like ingrained interactive experiences. So if you can imagine, you mentioned ESL and CSGO, like I don't know, maybe they've got like I don't know, say G Fuels as a sponsor. It could rain G Fuel power during a halftime show in the stadium because we can do really cool and fun stuff there as well. So I think for us, it's going to be exploring more, let's say, interactive and engaging experiences as opposed to like the joke filling 90% of your field of view with pop-up advertisements. That's really kind of not what our goal is. We're very much more here to try and build sort of, let's say, these more direct brand engagements as you would kind of have in the real world. If I'm pretty sure a lot of people listening will be familiar with like the fan parks, like that they did like the LCS finals and worlds, etc. Like it happens all across the board at all esports events. So those are the kind of style of engagements for advertising we're looking at. That said, when we talk about advertisement, we also make it clear with our partners, because in the same way, kind of when you go to a Twitch channel, that Twitch channel is that Twitch channel's owner, right? So if I have my Twitch channel, I can put whatever sponsors I want on that, and that's that, right? We have a similar approach. So we basically, if you want to do stuff with your partners, brand partners in your stadium, because we offer different partners, organizers, and team stadiums. It's something that got some more announcements coming out for that in the new year, as I mentioned. But we very much look at that as like your space. So again, same as you would have with other platforms like Twitch, YouTube, etc. So we very much focused on when it comes down to like these interactive and engaging experiences. That's what we do with partners. So for their own events, what like you said, ESL, like CS:GO as an example, but then also in like the lobby spaces, which is sort of, as I said, like the homepage of Twitch as an example. So we kind of operate on that capacity. But I think overall, taking a step back from the advertising part of it, I think one of the key things to illustrate and to mention here, we're a free app. So we are making sure that, and this is something we always wanted to, like, we were pretty key on from day one. We wanted to make sure we could build a free experience, and that's free for everyone. That is free for the publishers. We do not charge publishers. It is free for the organizers. Don't charge them. Free for the teams in terms of how they work, and free for users, right? So the way that works, and you can ask, like, well, how do we make any money? The answer there is basically as kind of as a free-to-play game, right? Cosmetics, typical things, mini games, things that we do as part of the experience, and the same kind of way you would see other games monetize, essentially. So, and that also then means as well, though, for our partners, not only do they have their own space that they can advertise in, that we help them with that, and then advertisement as well for endemics, non-endemics that want to advertise into the esports space, but we're also opening up these monetization options that exist in games to people that typically wouldn't have access to that. Obviously, publishers are predominantly the owners of when it comes down to monetizing cosmetics in games. So this is also how we look at trying to add value across the ecosystem for us, really, is trying to make sure that with the experience we're building, everyone's benefiting. That's really our goal and objective. The publisher's benefiting, the organizer is benefiting, the teams are benefiting, because again, we don't charge any of them anything. So it's free to use platform, as is Twitch and YouTube, etc. All these other places. I refer to Twitch and YouTube a lot just because they're the kind of video platforms or content distribution platforms we know of that exist today. So, but that's kind of typically how we operate. And as I said, it's very much for us to try and add value across the space. And then that's also for viewers as well, like free to get, free app, etc. So we always want to also make sure that A viewer is also kind of like it survives on its own merit, and a viewer is also kind of getting a better experience or getting a different experience from what they otherwise might be.
Awesome. And before I forget, the second part of that question that I made that was a bit too complicated. Come back to that. In terms of media rights, right? So
Yes.
I can imagine that getting media rights for such a unique and innovative product is a new ask for a lot of these publishers, right? Like
Yeah.
how are we going to work together on this? This isn't a straight, okay, you can now, display this on your channel and you can sell ads on it, or however that's going to work. You're creating a new experience for their core product, for their esports product.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
So when it comes down to kind of content and licensing, so I think the answer here is it's a very new field, especially the kind of the way we're doing it as well. Like this is an experience that has never existed before. So for us, that kind of then means that there's a couple steps typically when we're working with new partners and publishers and game developers. First part is education because this hasn't existed before. So usually it's a what even is this thing? We say virtual stadium, but what does that mean? Hopefully that conversation is going to be a little bit easier over the coming months as we're now finally public, so people can just see what we're doing as opposed to us having to like try and use Chinese whispers and trying to communicate exactly the vision. And as we add more games, we hope as well that's clearer how, like, for example, a first-person shooter might work, or like how, like, I don't know, whatever, a sports game might work, etc., etc., like all these other things. Typically, once you can showcase like how a genre of a game would work, it kind of translates pretty easily for all of them. And we're the way we approach it is in an engine agnostic way. So it doesn't kind of matter how the game is built as well. It could be whatever engine. There's just different levels of complexity based on that, essentially. But when it comes down to kind of the rights, as I said, it's a new kind of rights case, realistically, for a lot of publishers. So in a lot of cases, it's kind of an exploratory step right now, where in most cases, they're kind of seeing a lot of what's happening. And obviously, we've been building this now for I've been kind of working conceptually on it for the best part of 4 years. Virtex existed for the last 2. We've been building and growing our team. But obviously, we kind of also grew up in the again, I'm going to say it again once more, the metaverse phase of everything. We kind of that happened sort of slap bang in the middle of the company's life and us building the product, etc. So I think there's also been like a little bit of interest based around that. Realistically, though, and I guess this is one of the things that will come up a lot, and people may be like, well, what's the difference between doing this kind of experience with Virtex versus like doing something in Rec Room, Fortnite, Roblox, like all these other UGC platforms? And I think from us and our perspective, and also obviously the rights is a big part of it, right? This is we're doing it officially with the publishers, with everyone on board, so it's all like we're making sure it's all everyone's happy with everything we're doing. But then I think separately from that, it's also really delivering a very specific experience and making sure, I think this is also something to really stress, we're here to build something that people like play, they enjoy, and they come back to. Not something they're going to jump in for 5 minutes and be like, oh, that was cool, and then just throw it away. Like that's really not what we're here for. We're here to build like a serious long-term platform with like a retentive, fun experience for users that has serious added value for all stakeholders. I think that's really kind of our approach. So I think for us as well, part of it has been trying to communicate that bit realistically as well, because with the metaverse and like the entire change over the last kind of like last 1 to 2 years, there's obviously been a lot of interest in the space. So trying to also make it very clear that we're kind of here for the right reasons, I think, as well. And also, again, I talked a little bit about my background, like being a massive esports fan coming from esports, like that's our passion as well. Like we're doing this out of a place of passion, not of a one of, oh, this is cool, we can make some money from this. That's not really what we're here for. We're very much here to try and build something that is medium changing, hopefully long term. Like we really do think that there is completely untapped universe of opportunity and value across the board for this kind of experience. I mean, the example I like to go back to a lot, and sorry, it's getting a little bit off topic, but I think it's kind of relevant. Is I think for me one of the coolest I remember watching, like, and this is not to say other majors and world finals etc. aren't awesome. They all are for different reasons, but I think it was like in 2017, the AR Dragon in the League of Legends World Final was one of those first times where we just saw like what could be done with that kind of experience, and it was like a taste, I think, of what is to come. And I think realistically, we look at that and go, instead of it being you're watching this from a fixed camera perspective that like if it goes slightly off the track, suddenly the dragons are flying off, like those kind of things. That is like from a very specific viewpoint. Instead of it being that, like it's actually the dragon being literally behind you, like in your seat, like that. That's the kind of experience that we want to create, and that's where we see the untapped potential. So I think a lot of when it comes down to the media rights and licensing, is sort of trying to communicate a little bit of this vision that we have, and also showing them obviously what we're doing, what we've done. That said, though, we kind of see a lot of this is very exploratory right now. So I can't like say like here is the formula for like how this works for all the different game publishers, because also I will say right now every game publisher very different for many different reasons, but no one is the same. But I think the thing is that there's kind of a universal like appreciation of what this could be. I think from a lot of different perspectives when it comes down there. So as I said, we've got ongoing conversations with a lot of different brands, and I think this is going to be something that even just in a rights scenario, right, even just in a rights case, is going to become more commonplace over probably the next few years. You even actually see this in traditional sports. Funny enough, it's like something that's been happening a lot. The World Cup's doing something in Roblox right now. Like I think it's literally happening like with the end of 16 or the last group. So yeah, there's stuff happening across the space, and you're going to see this trend. I think it's just going to be it'll take probably a little bit longer because games are very different from traditional sports. There's a very different right structure, a little bit of a different conversation. But yeah, it's I say it's definitely still early days, but it's a interesting thing that I think publishers are also looking at and being like, there's actually some potential real legs for this.
Well, I think it's no secret that publishers sort of stand to benefit the most currently with esports, right? They're the ones that control most of the rights. They're the ones that are able to use esports as marketing for their companies and the games to get more people interested by hosting these big events. And those are who you're sort of working with directly. Otherwise, esports is pretty difficult to monetize and revenue is pretty hard to come by. Um, but you guys have just had a successful funding round already, raising around $3 million. So, I'm wondering if the happenstance of the metaverse sort of trending at that moment sort of helped out, and if you were able to lean into that a little bit, even though you guys are, I mean, you seem pretty like we're not metaverse. I'm using that word because people sort of
Yeah,
are
yeah.
like it's around or whatever, but that's not what you're pitching. Really, you're pitching, a virtual reality experience. So I'm wondering if that came into play, and also what you're trying to do most with the money that you've raised.
Yeah, definitely. And I also just flagged very quickly. I mentioned publishers a fair few times so far on the podcast today, but I will say as well, as I mentioned, I think very briefly, we are also working really closely with organizers and teams because, as I said, we're here for all aspects of the ecosystem, and the idea is we're opening up hopefully monetization options that didn't exist for a lot of those partners as well. As you said, like a lot of the monetization is really strong on the publisher side and the game side, and that's typically how the space works. So we also want to really help out. I don't want to be one of those another one of those startups that's like we're going to fix the esports monetization problem because everyone says that. We think we have some ideas and solutions that can really have a difference, but we also are kind of like we're still early days. But if you believe in kind of gaming and the gaming experience and how games monetize, then you should hopefully believe we're in a really pretty decent spot to potentially make a difference. So that's definitely one part of it. When it comes down to the funding, yeah, I think actually weirdly enough, the funding that we did that you mentioned there that we raised was actually like just before the metaverse kind of hype train sort of started. So we weren't able to benefit too much off of that. But that said, we actually have just secured a little bit more funding as well from a couple of also really interesting partners that I think I don't think it's been announced just yet, but it should be announced pretty soon. But yeah, generally speaking, what we're spending that money on is basically product at this point. I mean, at the grand scheme of things, we're building a game. You could look at it like that. Technically speaking, it's more of a platform, like if you want to be really specific. But at the end of the day, we're building a game and a game engine, like essentially. Lots of extra things that go into that, but it's also a multiplayer game, which is typically hard. If you ask any game developer, they'll be like, multiplayer is like an extra step up. I think it was John Carmack, I think it was, that literally said building games is harder than building rockets nowadays. So generally speaking, it's not easy. So a lot of what we've been doing with our funding so far has just been building out a team, really. And also, I think a team that can also deliver really high quality. A lot of our team come from a AAA background. So coming from like Riot, Epic, etc., different studios for many people recognize the games from. But we really wanted to make sure also we're building a pretty compelling, like visually compelling experience, because also, as I mentioned, come back to the licensing point, being able to convince a publisher that you're doing their game and their IP justice means that it also needs to look good. Because if you present, I don't know, any kind of like really subpar or like mobile game sort of style experience, it will not stand up to the quality of the content that exists in these titles. And both myself as a player and as an esports fan, like if I'm coming from like, I don't know, Valorant, CSGO, like I have a certain quality expectations when I look at my games and what looks and doesn't look good. So we also were very aware that we needed to make sure we build something that really looks the part, I think, as well. So we've been building out a lot of our team across the board, from engineering to art. I will actually also take this very quick opportunity to plug that we are still hiring for a number of roles. So if you're into the space and love esports and you're a dev yourself or an artist or whatever, we do have a bunch of roles up on our website. So please do check those out because we are still hiring. But yes, basically, really from us, it's been team building and also experience building from our end, and really just focusing on product because, as we said, like that's what we're here for. We're here to build something that's real, sustainable, not quick and gimmicky. It's like that's not the point. So that's sort of where we've been putting our money.
And you've mentioned that we can look forward to an announcement with a partnership of a top tier esports title later this year. But in your wildest dreams, what would be an event that you would really want to really see come to life in Virtex?
Oh, that's a good question. Man, that's really hard as well because I love lots of different, like they're all different. I would say like at the top esports events globally, you've got like the international, you've got the CS majors, like they all have a bit of a different selling point and vibe. But I think for me, I mentioned at the beginning, like I'm a league player, season 2, like through to current day, too many hours spent in that game. But for me, and like again, I think I was watching Worlds this year, like 6 a.m. with the rest of us up for that. And like being able to see that go to game 5 in Silver Scrapes was incredible. And I think as well, I mentioned the AR Dragon from 2017, which is like, I think for us is one of the inspirations of kind of this sort of style experience of stepping into this more like doing things that you could never imagine doing in the real world, or like taking these events that you could experience and not only bridging that gap between the real world and the online broadcast, but also kind of stepping up past that. I think definitely Riot would probably be, and League of Legends Worlds, I think for us would probably be, or for me personally, would probably be the one event. If I could say, if we could choose one event in the world to do, I think that would be one of them. I think especially as well when it comes down to just kind of like allowing fans to step into the universe of the game. I think that's also something where, again, everyone on the team is like a big esports and gaming fan. So like we all love different games for different reasons. So when we work with different games and different content, we really want to make it feel like you're stepping into that universe, like you're stepping into the world, because that's something that can't be done anywhere else, right? You can't, like, even in a physical venue, you're still in like a real building, right? Like you can't like step in to the foot of Mount Targon in like League, or like jump into like the deserts of like Dust from CS, or like in Valorant Fracture. Like there are so many cool experiences we can build around this content. So I also think, especially for us, something like League Worlds, again, come back to the AR Dragon, like I think is definitely something where we could really try and make you feel like you're stepping into the world of Runeterra as well, in a very unique way around the event, in a way that kind of would be like impossible to do any other way, I think is the thing.
Amazing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think if you were able to sort of have that experience of being able to really watch, I mean, like I think attending Worlds live is on a lot of people's bucket list, of course,
Yeah.
and that is like, yeah, a big
I think
dream for
attending Worlds
everybody.
lives and it not being a 3-0 in the final, I think is like the like if you had to put an asterisk against it. But yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. And but then also being able to have this experience, as you said, where you could really like, be there in a like be right next to the Nexus when it goes down, or be right there as Baron spawns and be able to
Like
watch that team fight.
imagine like I think it was the Baron Steel, like in game 5 of Worlds, like where it just went crazy. Imagine being literally stood in the pit, like seeing Varus walking up, charging his Q, like these kind of things, like absolutely. And these are, I think we also talk about that as like creating memories, right? Like this is something that you do when you go to LAN, you create these memories. Like for me, one of my memories is it's a stupid one, but it's still like one of my favorites is going to European LCS when it was at Wembley Arena in the UK, and I think it was like the most boring game 5 or something. I think it was like 3 or 4 games into the day. It was the most boring game ever, and the crowd started erupting for ward kills. I think it was like one of the first times I've ever seen it as well. I don't know if it was the first time it had happened, but I just remember like just the sheer volume of everyone. It was crazy. But it's like the ability to create those moments and memories, I think, is definitely something where we're sort of in the market for, basically, and creating those special moments, whether that's around moments in the game, moments with your friends, because that's, again, one of the things that makes it so special, right? Having those moments with your friends that you can then talk about forever, right? And then like also just, but also for like the events, the immersive experience, like the opening ceremonies that like blow your socks off and everything else to go with it. But obviously, with everything we do, built around the core of the live game. So it's not like this one-off experience you're going to just try and have fun with as like a small game. It's like, it's the actual thing. Like it's actually happening in front of you live in real time with all the bells and whistles.
Sounds incredible, really. Really
Awesome.
looking forward to your announcements coming in this next year. And yeah, trying it out. I don't personally have a VR set, but I'm sure
We've got
I'll
2D mode just for you.
yeah.
It's fine. That's the whole point.
Oh yeah, 2D
Yeah,
mode. Yeah.
yeah, no, we've got we call it 2D mode internally, but basically it's again, as I said, we're not just a VR app. We have VR modes in there. People be familiar permanent terminally online people here will probably all listen will be familiar with VR chat and all the streamers there that do that kind of thing. So same thing with us. We also put a lot of love and attention into the desktop mode or console, etc., those kind of things. So we do really try and make sure it's like we're on par across the board. So that's really our goal, is to try and make it across the board. So yeah, absolutely, love to see you in there at some point.
Yeah, I'm definitely hyped to check it out. But where can people find you? I'm assuming that Virtex is on Twitter, also terminally online.
Yes, yeah, we are indeed. Our team's managing accounts. We've actually just revived our accounts because we're just getting ready to launch. So yeah, it's just at Virtex Stadium on Twitter. It's probably one of the best places to follow us for updates. I'm just at VR Jersey, at VRJSY on Twitter. If you want to follow my typically game developer hot takes and like me shouting about silver scrapes when it comes to League World Finals, etc., the things like that. But generally speaking, yeah, that's the place to find us. And as mentioned, keep an eye out for updates coming. We've got, obviously, we're just about to announce first events for Echo VR, which is the game that was announced last year for us. And then, as mentioned, the one we're really looking forward to, the first top global esports title coming to the platform early next year. And then keep an ear out for more games coming to the platform potentially later on towards the end of 2023. But we've got a lot of stuff on our hands and a lot of cool events coming up. So we're very excited to get going into next year.
Amazing. And we're also excited to stay up to date as well. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Tim. It was a pleasure to have you and learn more about Virtex and sort of dream wildly about what these experiences will be looking like next year.
Well, I think I hope it's not dreaming for too long. I think from our side, I think that's the point. We're here. You'll be hearing and seeing more of this stuff coming into the beginning of New Year. So yeah, I think we're kind of in a position now where we want to start taking those dreams and making them real.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kerry. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.